Gentlemen, if I could just have your attention please for a brief moment of housekeeping before we formally start our global education dialogue. You will be aware of the fact that we need to talk to you about any emergency evacuation procedures in case of anything happening. We will be informed by the staff if there's any reason we need to evacuate the building. The evacuation points are through the emergency exit there, or alternatively through the emergency exit here, where you turn right through this door, left through that door, and you should head towards Plaza Terrace Garden, where we shall assemble and the hotel staff will take care of us. That's just all we have to say, just in case there's anything which happens. I'm sure it won't happen. So we have done the housekeeping parts of things. I'm now formally going to ask Mr. Rob Lynes, who's the Country Director of India, to open our session today. Rob.
Thank you, Michelle, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning and welcome to this Global Education Dialogue, Women and Leadership, the Absent Revolution. And we're delighted to have with us senior policymakers, researchers and leaders from 8 countries. They include India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Iran, Indonesia and the UK and Afghanistan. And while we have a room full of women leaders and some men leaders too, it's a sad reflection on the world that as we sit here today, out of over 200 countries, there are only 10 women serving as heads of state and 15 as heads of government. In business too, the story is very similar. For example, in the UK, women account for only 6.9% of senior executive roles in the FTSE 100. That's the top 100 companies in the UK. And there are actually only 4 women CEOs. Imagine. It's estimated that it will take 70 years to reach parity with men. And of course, some of us may not be around by then. The absence of women in leadership is a global problem, from politics to business to education. But I am, however, encouraged that there is a broader debate now happening around the world around women and leadership. Recently I read that even in Saudi Arabia there was a conference on women at Al Qasim University. Some of you may have seen this. Unfortunately, no women were invited to this, which highlights the fact that we still have a long way to go. Today we are here to debate, examine and ultimately to change something which is important for all of us here. That is the widespread absence of women in leadership positions in higher education. Our conference on Women and Leadership, the Absent Revolution is part of the British Council Global Education Dialogue series around South Asia. This brings together UK and South Asia partners to confront and address critical issues facing international higher education. And the series is very much outcome and solutions focused, with opportunities for partnerships and collaborations amongst delegates. Partnership, of course, is central to the UK's relations with India and South Asia. And when we bring all these bilateral connections together into regional and global networks, we can get a very powerful forum like we have here today, that can tackle and challenge issues that affect all of us. And there is no bigger challenge than the subject of this dialogue here in Delhi. In higher education, the statistics speak for themselves. In South Asia, only 3% of vice-chancellors are women. In the UK, we are still a long way from reaching parity at around 17%. The potential of women is a global challenge and an imperative. At this conference, we'll be launching 2 new pieces of groundbreaking research. Women in Higher Education Leadership in South Asia, Rejection, Refusal, Reluctance and Revisioning. This is done by the University of Sussex, and we have the researchers here who will be presenting this later on. And another on Women in Research Careers, Defined by Absence, Women in Research in South Asia, by the Economist Intelligence Unit. And you'll hear more about these reports later, but they show that there are complex and multi-dimensional aspects and barriers to women's leadership in higher education. And these range from social, cultural and economic barriers in each of our countries, the organisational culture in our universities, discrimination in recruitment and selection, and unequal power relations, and of course, the traditional role of women. On top of that, there's a lack of data on gender. There's so a lot that we don't know about gender because it's often absent from the analysis in higher education policy making. But these groundbreaking reports shed light on the reasons for extreme gender inequality in higher education leadership, but more importantly, make recommendations for how this can change. But this requires change agents, and this is why you are here today. You are the change agents for this to happen. We must ensure that we break down the barriers preventing women from reaching their full potential, because we need the best people for our academic institutions, irrespective of gender. Our universities should be leading the way. By leveraging our bilateral and global networks in higher education towards this aim, as we are doing today, we have the best chance of making this happen. I hope that through fora like this, the barriers and challenges that are preventing women from attaining leadership positions across all walks of life are addressed, so that my daughters and your daughters and daughters across the world have equity, parity and equality with your sons and sons everywhere. So thank you all again once for coming. This is an important conference. It's great that so many of you are here, and I hope you have a very productive couple of days and also a very transformative dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate those comments. Can I first of all welcome again our Iranian colleagues to say thank you very much for coming. We're delighted that you're here attending the first of the South Asia Policy Dialogues. We look forward to your participation in all of them over the next year. So thank you very, very much for coming. And also thank you to colleagues from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, India, and wherever else I've forgotten, but the UK. And thank you really for coming. The South Asia Policy Dialogues are slightly different. You know, we were thinking of actually calling them not another policy dialogue, because quite often there are policy events that do come together. But what makes these policy dialogues very different is really three things. The first thing is research. At each of these events, new research is produced. We also have think pieces, and so we add to the wider understanding of what's happening in South Asia and the UK in terms of higher education. And that's quite rare. The second thing is this is a unique platform for policymakers across South Asia and the UK to come together. The South Asia region is one of the least joined up regions. Only 3% of trade occurs within the South Asia region. And this platform provides an opportunity for policymakers, researchers to share good practice and to build. And the third reason why this policy dialogue is different is because of the fundamental changes taking place in South Asia. In the next 10 years, there will be another 700 universities built in South Asia. Every month for the next 12 years, that's every month, each month for the next 12 years, 1 million new entrants to the labour force are coming in. So the questions that get posed are, with 700 new universities in 10 years, where are the lecturers going to come from? Where are the vice chancellors going to come from? Where will the talent pool come from? And this brings us very much to the theme of our conference. Chairman Mao Zedong once said, "Women hold up half the world's sky." And one of the things that's interesting that Rob mentioned is it's interesting they may hold up half of the world's sky, but they seem to be missing from all the data, all the research, and all the evidence. What we're starting off today is with two very distinguished colleagues who are going to open the theme of our conference. But you might like to be able to comment on their discussions as it goes along. So if you want to comment, please use the hashtag #TalkHE. Please tweet massively. But also do remember, this is live streamed, will be going on YouTube, so whatever you do in the audience will be being seen. I'm delighted that we have two distinguished colleagues with us. The first colleague is Jude Kelly. Jude Kelly is a woman who doesn't take no for an answer. When she was 7 and she said to her parents, "I'd really like to become a theatre director," they looked somewhat surprised, and when she told her teachers, they just shook their heads. When she was 14 and told her teachers that she wanted to do qualifications to become a theatre director, they sort of shook their heads. When she went to university and said, "I really want to become a theatre director," they shook their heads. Of course, Jude Kelly is the director of the South Bank Arts Centre, a 22-acre complex, the largest arts complex in the United Kingdom. She has been director of the National Theatre, Royal Shakespeare Theatre, you name the theatre, she sort of directed it. She's a woman who not only does not take no for an answer, but has been a great advocate, not only for women and empowerment, but actually for showing that ideas, passion, know no borders and no barriers. So we're really delighted that Jude Kelly is with us. So welcome, Jude. And we're also delighted, and Jude has just hot-footed it here from Pakistan, where she was speaking at the Karachi Literary Festival. And we're also delighted to welcome Lalita Kumaramangalam. I've practiced that twice and I've still got that wrong. But we'd like to say, welcome. Lalita is chairperson of the National Commission of Women of India. She's took over that role since 2014. She's a prominent political leader, frequently appears on the press, the TV. She's been working tirelessly for decades in India on the empowerment and advancement of women, especially from vulnerable communities. She's worked on issues as diverse as healthcare, underprivileged sections of society, LGBT, HIV/AIDS, and has actually been a powerful human rights advocate. And she will also be speaking. Welcome, Lalita. Thank you. The way this is going to go, we're going to ask Jude and then Lalita to make presentations, and then we're going to open up for a question and answer session. So first of all, over to you, Jude.
Well, good morning. Just ignore that picture for a minute. I'll explain about it shortly. First of all, can I say I'm really thrilled to be here. All my life, I have enjoyed the intellectual and emotional discourse between women and girls, and from right across the world, known that they have been a continuous force for change, and that we build our stamina for change by learning from each other, by understanding that right across the world we have the same concerns, and that right across the world throughout history, women and girls have been trying to make change. This is not a new occurrence. We're not living in an era where suddenly we've woken up to what girls' and women's potential can be. Actually, throughout the whole of history, women poets, women writers, women educationalists have existed and have tried to make change, as indeed have millions of mothers and millions of fathers. I'm not an academic, so I won't be delivering you a paper, but I am somebody who, as Peter says, have now a long history of trying to support the shaping of culture, particularly in the United Kingdom, the shaping of culture to recognise the fact that the story of humans has to be the story of women and men together. And as a theatre director, as a maker of stories, it's against a backdrop where I was a little girl that suggests that the only big and important stories are big and important stories about men and made by men. And therein, I think, lies something absolutely fundamental in our society, which is to do with what girls inherit as an idea of their place in the world. I was born in Liverpool. I'm one of 4 daughters, and I have a father still alive at 90 and a mother still alive at 90. But I say that my father because as one of 4 daughters, my father had an option to encourage us to a degree or encourage us to our utmost potential. And he chose the latter. And I don't know, as you're thinking around the room, what role your father played in supporting you becoming an educated and powerful woman. But my guess is that many of you had fathers who were very supportive. And all my unacademic research has proved to me that when fathers believe that daughters can do anything they want to, then a woman's confidence grows exponentially. Because if you are brought up as a little girl looking at the world order and thinking that the story is orchestrated and developed by men, then inevitably when a man tells you that you're something special and you can go places, his word is God. You believe him. And it's that moment of self-belief that drives girls and women forward. Whereas regularly girls and women have obstacles, emotional obstacles put in their way. And I think it's emotional obstacles that are far more significant often than physical barriers or technical barriers. Something about self-belief is a thing that drives girls and women forward. And if you dent self-belief, then that's very, very hard to recover from. I'm going to talk a little bit about women that I looked to when I was searching for self-belief, and I'll explain why. When I was a little girl, Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister of India, and Golda Meir was Prime Minister of Israel. And in our government at the time, although I wasn't really, very aware, we had women politicians, and there was a particular woman, Jenny Lee, indeed, who formed most of the significant cultural policies in Britain that we still use. And in terms of working women and equal pay, later in my young years, Barbara Castle was a formidable and powerful figure who changed an awful lot of women's conditions. So I had got images in my mind of powerful women, a few. And I went to a mixed school when I was a little girl, and already noticed by that time that boys were often given significant tasks to do and girls were asked to help. And I never really understood why wearing shorts gave you that power and wearing a skirt didn't. I wasn't really clear in my mind as to why, how we were dressed, and why we were girls and boys distinguished us in terms of power. Because at that point, having no brothers and having a father who was very committed to our education and having prime ministers in front of me like Indira Gandhi made me think, well, at some stage the world is equal once I've finished school. But when I was 14, I was sitting in a mixed class. I was at a girls' school that went comprehensive. So we went from all girls to suddenly a mixed class. And we sat in a chemistry lesson on our first day of term. And the chemistry teacher said to us, he was a man, he said, we're going to do a quiz today because it's the first day of term, you've just all got together as boys and girls, let's have a quiz. And he said, so we're going to talk about geniuses in society. And now he said, it's a well-known fact that the human brain is different for men and women. He said the human brain for a man means that he is more likely to be a genius, and he's also more likely to end up in a mental hospital. Whereas women's brains are more average. So as a woman, you're more likely to be a steady person, neither a genius or a mad person. This is from our chemistry teacher. So I jumped off my stool, I'll never forget it, and said, that can't be true and I don't believe it. There are women geniuses. And he said, name one. And I said, Marie Curie. And he said, okay, name another. And I had to sit down. I remember all the boys laughing at me, probably the girls did too. And I was so embarrassed to suddenly realize that I had absolutely no historical evidence for a gut feeling that this could not be true. But I had nothing I could say to my elder, my expert teacher, my chemistry teacher, who presumably knew about brains, I was told. And it made me realize that I had never been given a history of girls' and women's achievements. And I think that is still the case. So every time I was looking to build my confidence as a theatre director, I was having to say, me, Jude Kelly, on my own, I'm entitled to be one. Not because any other woman had done it, but just because I personally had to find the self-will to get there on my own. Now, of course, there were women theatre directors. There were women theatre directors in the 1600s. There was a whole fleet of women directors called the female wits in the UK, who were part of the Restoration period, who owned playhouses, who wrote plays, who produced plays, who financed plays, but I didn't know they existed. And so one of the things that I have come to believe is that as women, we owe ourselves to find out about our real history and understand that this struggle for equality has gone on for thousands of years, but what we're not able to do at the moment is connect the dots for our daughters, our nieces, and our girls generally, and for women, for men too. We keep on talking about ourselves as if we're pioneering, as if we're the first generation, but it's not true. Florence Nightingale, she wasn't a lady with a lamp. She was a statistician. She was a mathematician. And she was the first woman who was able to explain through statistics what was happening with regard to cholera and therefore bring about changes in the health services that she was offering. Now, I was told as a little girl that she sort of ministered to men with a kind of a wet cloth and went round with a candle, being kind to people. I had no idea she was a mathematician, a statistician. Now, hands up all who knew she was a statistician. One man. Well, that's good that you do, but we didn't. Ethel Smythe. Anybody know who she is? Obviously, this is UK history. So I am still living in a generation of women who are told that innate creativity does not naturally belong to women, and particularly in the areas of classical music and conducting. Even now, we had the first woman, Marion Alsop, conducting the proms this year. And as a result of the first woman conducting the proms, which is one of our largest classical music festivals in the UK, we had all kinds of discussion from conductors across the world saying they didn't really believe that women could finally conduct an orchestra. Or if they did, they might be able to conduct certain kinds of music that was soft, but they would never really be able to tackle Beethoven. Now, Ethel Smythe was a composer, and she was also part of the women's rights movement in the UK. She was one of the suffragettes. She composed a number of symphonies that are now being revived. She was one of the key symphonic composers for the proms, for Henry Wood when he started the proms. And she wrote the March of the Women, which was the anthem for the suffragettes in the UK. For one of the key prom concerts, she was supposed to be giving the premiere of her work, conducting her work, but she was in Holloway Prison as a suffragette on hunger strike. And Henry Wood came to see her to try to persuade her to give up the hunger strike and come back and conduct at the proms. And she was leaning out of the window down into the courtyard below, conducting a group of women with her toothbrush who were singing the March of the Women. She did eventually come back to the proms after the women had won the vote. Lillian Bayliss started the Old Vic Theatre and Sadler's Wells, and many of our theatres that in Britain are now the premier theatres. But did I know that when I was trying to be a young theatre director and producer? No, nobody told me. Harriet Tubman, one of the key organisers of the slaves escaping from the south to the north, creating this thing called the Underground Railway that really preceded Martin Luther King in establishing that civil rights was something that everybody should expect. Annie Horniman started the Abbey Theatre in Dublin and also the Birmingham Theatre. Ninette de Valois started the Royal Ballet. Marie Romba started the Ballet Romba. Lily Parr. Now, Lily Parr, she scored more goals as a footballer between 1921 and 1928 than any man. Because at that time, women's football was part of the Premier League, as they had it in those days. And Dick Kerr's women's team had the biggest gate in St. Helens, 52,000, in 1928. And in 1928, at that point, they banned women's football as a professional activity because they said it was inappropriate for women. So until 1979, women's football in Britain was banned as a professional activity. Now, anybody know that? Here it is. The game of football is quite unsuitable for females and ought not to be encouraged. And there's the football team that had the highest gate, more than any man's team. And I could go on. Gold medalist in the Olympics before women were allowed to skate in the Olympics, which is why they changed the criteria. Amy Johnson, Amelia Earhart, Sarah Bernhardt, etc. The 4 Dagenham women are fighting for equal pay. We still haven't got it. We have it legislatively, but not actually. Carmen Miranda, mad entertainer, but she forced to be reckoned with, and so on. Anybody know Wilma Rudolph, double gold medalist in America? There are so many examples of women who have changed the course of history for themselves, thinking they would be the symbol of change, and then history closed over them. Now, I asked somebody here, and I took the liberty of asking an educationalist here from India if she knew of this woman. You can't really see, and I haven't got a slide of her, but can you tell me if you've heard of Iqbalunnisa Hussain? No. Well, I'm just going to read you her history. She was born in Bangalore in 1908. She was married at the age of 15 and had 7 children. She joined the college at 16 in Mysore and later the Maharani's College, from where she obtained her BA degree in 1930. This is after she'd had her 7 children. In 1933, she went to Leeds University with one of her eldest children with her. She could only take 1 child with her. She became one of the few Muslim women from India to obtain a degree from the UK. She represented India at the 12th International Women's Conference in Istanbul in September 1935. She was a member of the All India Women's Conferences. She founded in Bangalore a school for Muslim girls. She brought in the Girl Guides into India. She established the Urdu Girls Middle School. She formed the Teachers Association for Muslim Women Teachers, etc. And she's the author of many books. And this is what she says in 1938. Woman as an individual has the same power of feeling, sentiment, and emotions as a man. The faculties of mind, such as observation, reasoning, criticism, and power of expression, grow in a child from a very young age, and at the age of 5 or 6, a child feels an impelling force within to express itself in different ways. If philosophy is a solace of mind to a man, it is the same to a woman. Women are susceptible to the joys and sorrows of this world to the same extent as men. They, like men, continually fall prey to the ills of existence. They have to encounter in the battlefield of this world the same amount of evil as a man. It's an extraordinary book, and her grandson gave it me the other day in Pakistan. But it was sort of with sorrow that I received it, because I knew that probably nobody's heard of her, and you're all educationalists. And why I think this is significant is because if as educationalists, and if as leading figures in culture, we as role models are going to lose our potency the second we die, or the second we remove ourselves from public life, then in some ways we may have almost not have existed. And it's this fear I have that the world as it's set up in every single country in the world, every single country in the world, says to girls and women that they are not equal to men. We can't name a country that doesn't have that as its overarching imagery. And particularly when you think about culture, when you think about writing, film, music, photography, it doesn't really matter how many girls and women are beginning to be terrific in their field if history is going to tell us that they were the exception to the rule all the time. And it doesn't really matter how many girls are educated and how many women become the top FTSE 100, if we then roll history on again and say, well, there were a few but not many. So my question to myself and to all the women leaders, and the men too, is, are we being really too docile in our attitude to equality? There's a phrase that we use about women in situations of domestic violence. We say, well, why doesn't she just leave? Or why does she stay? Now, you're sophisticated people. You all know the complexity that comes with an answer. Well, often she can't leave because economically she's bound into that relationship. She has dependence in that relationship. She's emotionally invested in that relationship. And frankly, she's nowhere else to go. So as women, if you took the symbolism of domestic violence and transposed it to our world, we are economically dependent on our world. We have invested in our world. We have dependence in our world. And there is no other world to go to. There isn't another world where men and women are equal. We're in this world. And I think, like a lot of women in violent relationships, we negotiate and deal with the world to try to make it work as best it can. And while we negotiate and deal with the world as best it can, we put up with and are complicit to a massive range of inequalities on a daily basis. And we let it go. Because if we fought every single battle, we'd be an outcast. And so, in a sense, we are always repeating an idea that the world that we're in and the cards that we've been dealt with are okay. We can do it. We can cope. We can manage it. And so, no wonder, as girls, they look at us and inherit the same thing. And if we don't have enough images of women who sort of broke the speed barrier, metaphorically, then we're suggesting that the method of women's leadership that is best dealt with is one where they compromise, negotiate, and fit into a world as it already is. I don't have a solution. I've done the same thing all my life, of course. I have partners that I love. I have a son that I love as well as my daughter. I mean, I'm dealing with a man's world all the time, and I don't blame individual men. But what is it that we can do that is different? Well, first of all, I think we can call it out for what it is more often. I think we have to be bolder about saying this is a world that is unfair. Every part of the world is unfair. There's no one bit that is doing so much better than the other because the construct is the same. We have to tell our girls what the world is, and we have to present what the world could be. I spoke to a group of headmistresses who are heads of all the independent girls' schools in Britain recently, and I talked to them about whether in their own classrooms and schools they talk about feminism as a movement that simply says women are entitled to equal human rights to men. And they said they didn't really like to use the word too much because it sounded antagonistic. And I said that's another example of language being repossessed when it simply means believing in women's equality. I also asked them how much they got paid. And sheepishly, these powerful women told me that they get paid less than their equivalent heads in male schools. I don't know, I'm just going to ask the women here. Do you get paid the same as your male heads? You're shaking your head. Some of you are saying yes. Okay. You're sure? Go and check. It's a government, yes, it's a government setup. Well, great. Well, so you're doing better. So women in state schools in Britain are paid the same, but women in private schools are not. So here are these women, and let's not be unclear about this. 7% of children go to private schools in Britain, but those 7% are 77% of the leaders of all institutions in Britain. So leaving aside the issue of inequality in a much greater sense anyway, you've already got a group of girls leading the country who have been told through imagery that even if they get to the top, they're not really equal to men. So my final point is that as a woman in charge of culture, I know that unless on our stages, in our cinemas, in our theatres, in our literature, unless we can redress the balance, that creativity is as much a divine potential in a woman as it is in a man, then women will always feel that they are an addition to the world, not the source of the world. And we've got a long way to go to change that. But you as educationalists, formally, in classrooms, in higher education, speaking to people about the power of education, you also have, and you're taking it on, I know, this responsibility to persuade men and women that to leave women alone thinking that it is their struggle on an individual basis and that they're the first in history to do this, this is a huge gap in education. So, apart from what we're doing on a daily basis, I don't know how we can go back and redress history. But unless we do, we're constantly going to be told that we are the first to try to make changes, and therefore we should slow down. Don't take it too quickly. But if you look at the litany of women who've broken through and then it's returned to stage one again, then I think you might agree that we should be fiercer, bolder, more outspoken, and that we must have a world movement. This isn't about women in India, or women in Pakistan, or women in Iran, or women in the UK. This is about women and girls together, because none of us live in a situation where equality has come about. And because she's so inspiring, and I hope you'll get this book, it's published by the Oxford Press, because she's so inspiring, I just wanted to end with something that she says. An action is nothing but a desire put into practice. Practice makes perfect. One's action develops one's experience. It's only the result of a series of acts. So we can talk a great deal, but unless we make action happen, there is no forward motion. One's success in one's purpose leads to another of the higher kind. The progress of humanity with its cultures and civilizations is only possible when the individuality of the human being is maintained and developed, and unless girls and women are seen as equal to human progress, the world will never be a peaceful place. Iqbalinisa Hussain, 1938. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Unlike Judith, I haven't done as much research as she has on this, but I was told that I need to specifically talk about the lack of women in leadership positions in the education sector in the southeast of Asia. Quite frankly, I have to admit that I don't have much research knowledge about the other countries, which is Sri Lanka, Pakistan, except from the report that was given to me about a week ago, which I went through. But instead, I mean, I'm sure that all of you here probably know much more than I do on this. So what I thought is I would talk about is actually the lack of parity that we face both as students and perhaps as budding politicians in the youth movements, regardless of what party you may belong to. And then after that, when you're talking about women's education or trying to push certain facets or introduce new ideas, etc., practices in women's education, the problems that people face. I took over as the chairperson of the National Commission of Women, Government of India, on 29 September 2014. Most of the things I deal with are with domestic violence and, of course, this endless series of rapes that is being publicized so much in India. Every day I think I send out about at least 2 to 3 suo motu notices to policemen and administrations all over the country, asking for explanations and action taken reports on either severe cases of bias against women or rapes, etc. I come from a family where women have been very fortunate. I was never taught that I'm not equal to my brother or my cousin brothers. Actually, in my family, it's a family joke that the women are tougher, better educated, and all of us work at some profession or the other. I was the third of 3 children, the second daughter. My mother used to say that I was the afterthought because I was born pretty late in their lives. I had a remarkable father and an equally remarkable grandfather from all accounts. He died when I was a little child of 4, but he was a man who took his wife with him to study in England after she'd had 2 children. My father was born there because of that. And I was always told, I was a little ruffian, I was a tomboy, as it's called. I used to play with my brother's friends, and I was never told that that's unladylike, or girls don't do this, girls don't do that. So by the time I finished school, I never thought that, you know, I can't study further, that I shouldn't aspire for something more than most girls do. And I remember my brother by that time had finished his post-graduation and had just got married, and we were then in Delhi. He wanted to return to Chennai because we are basically from the south, from Tamil Nadu. Against a lot of advice from a lot of people, I managed to get admission into Stephens in economics honors, and I refused to go back to Chennai then. I said, no, I'm not going back to study in any other college. If I can get into this college, I'm going to sit here and study. And my mother very reluctantly allowed me to stay in hostel. I returned to Chennai only after my undergraduation. And by the time I was in college, my father had passed away. I was 15 and a half when he passed away. So when Judith says that the approval that we need from the men in our lives is important, yes, but I was lucky enough to have a mother who really saw to it that there was no discrimination against a 15-and-a-half-year-old child who had lost her father, who was the center of her life. I was the little one in the family. I was my father's pet. But fortunately, because I had a mother who genuinely believed in the democracy between men and women, I really was lucky enough to perhaps be given the chance to realize my full potential. But education matters. As I said, I was very lucky. I was fortunate enough to get educated in some of the best schools and colleges in this country. And till today, when my CV, people read my CV and they say, oh, Stephens, okay, you must be quite good at your work, regardless of whether I am or not. Very few, there were only 42 of us in that year, 75 to 78, we were the first batch of girls. And I always remember how we used to be treated by, about 2,500 odd boys who were our classmates. We were just little cockroaches probably, to be stamped on, and they'd try their best to see if they could keep us down. We were a very feisty batch of girls, and we did pretty well even in comparison to the general level of extremely competent boys who were our classmates. After finishing college, I went to work in an engineering, in actually a company that produces trucks and buses. So I learned about things that girls didn't talk about, which is torque and chassis and unladen weight versus laden weight, etc., etc. It was after that that, when I got married and after I had my 2 children, I started work in the social sector. I started an NGO sometime in 1991, and I jumped into the HIV/AIDS. I was actually thrown into the deep end in the HIV/AIDS prevention work, which at that time meant that you really had to work at the grassroots level and was not as safe a sector to work in, safe or perhaps publicized or whatever, to work in as today. In 91, a girl from a fairly upper middle class family, working with sex workers and with transgendered populations and truckers, standing on the highways at 1 o'clock in the night, etc., it was considered a no-no. Endless people asked me, why do you work in this field? I mean, couldn't you find something else to do? But it was only when I started work there that I realized the degree of marginalization of women in Indian society. Till then, I'd really been protected. These were women who had to fight, really fight for their life. And I'm not talking just about HIV infection. They were given absolutely no sense of being even, semi-human, as I want to say. They were treated worse than often the pets we keep at home. And I'm serious, I'm not joking. Many women still are in this country. I had gone to Haryana for the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, the launch of the campaign. And I was appalled to hear people in Haryana, one of our MLAs from Haryana, said that, we have so few women and we've killed off so many of our little girls' fetuses in Haryana, that we are importing girls from Uttarakhand and Assam to become wives in Haryana. And of course, there was a huge political storm over it, but it is the truth. Which goes to Haryana has the worst male-female ratio in children below the age of 10 in the country. It's abysmal, it's below 900. It's 880 odd, which is terrifying. Because aside from the fact that women are not taught that we can be leaders, we are not even taught that we can be equal or that we have a chance to be equal. In India, we are still so far behind what Judith was talking about that I feel how long is it going to take us even to merely catch up. Here it's not a question of man against women, it's often a question of women against women. I have constantly been saying that in the fight to achieve some sort of equality, and I'm not saying total equality, I'm not even saying equal access or equal opportunity. I'm saying even in our fight to achieve some sort of equality, we need to have or we need to be able to also tell other women that we are not an inferior species. In fact, as she said, we are the source of life. So and the source of life, I don't mean just in terms of giving birth to babies. I mean, we are the ones who keep families together, who keep society running, who are, according to me, genetically stronger than men in many ways. In my family, for example, the women are tougher. We have survived much more. We have taken on much more. We've done very well, possibly because we've been given an extremely good start. But as I said, it's not for want of opportunities to the men in my family either. Many of them are extremely well-known names. But behind the scenes, we are the ones who held everything together. In Indian education, I think today the number of teachers at both school level and undergraduate and postgraduate level has increased. But I had a discussion with Mr. Mohandas Pai, who, as you know, is part of the Manipal family, and he himself said that yes, it's true, we have very few women in leadership or decision-making positions in Indian education. And I asked him why, because as I said, I really don't know too much about the sector. He said there are a host of reasons, but I feel one of the biggest reasons is, in addition to the lack of mentorship, in addition to the lack of encouragement given to women at the lower echelons of the education system as teachers, etc., women themselves have a lot of doubts about whether they can step into the shoes of the men at the top. Now, as Judith has pointed out, we need to believe in ourselves. We need to believe both individually and I think cohesively as a group that yes, we can get there, we can do it. No two people are born equal. But the fallacy that in some way women don't have technical brains, women are only emotional people, women, because they are childbearing, they have a few years that have to be devoted to their family and their children, therefore they cannot come up to decision-making positions in companies or universities or schools, etc., is totally wrong. One of my best educators was the lady who ran Springdale School, the first one who in Delhi, Rajani Kumar, a remarkable woman, absolutely remarkable woman. She was not Indian, she was British, but she came to India, set up a school that today everybody here, if I say Springdales, everybody knows the school. It has more than one huge branch and is still doing extremely well. She was a person who taught us that, man, woman, it was a co-education school. Girl, boy doesn't make a difference. Good students are good students. Girls can do as well in sports as boys can. I was in school in 72, and that was the first year that schools were allowed to participate in the Republic Day parade, because in the 71 war, of course, after that, I think the army was tired, or probably a lot of people had died, lots of casualties had occurred, etc. And there were two of us who led that march past from Springdale School, me and another boy. And everybody across the board, our three sports teachers said, "Nahi, ladki," let me translate that into English. A girl leading the march past, no, she won't be able to hold that heavy flag. But Mrs. Kumar said, no, let her try. Why not? And she saw to it that at least one girl was given, the opportunity to say that I stand equal to the boy in my class or my year or whatever. It takes an extraordinary person to be somebody who's so democratic, which she was. And as I said already, she was a woman. She was the best teacher who inspired us, who taught us, who guided us in all my life. And I've had a lot of very good teachers. And she was also the boss of the school. Now, it could be said that because she grew up in England and was educated there, perhaps she was far ahead of many other women of her time, which could be true. But the fact is that there's a huge amount of potential amongst women in India which lies untapped. Women need to mentor others. I'm not saying men shouldn't mentor women, but I'm saying that often we ourselves are prey to the fact that we in some way believe that we are not up to the mark, the standards that are set by especially men in our fields of work, whether it's government. We're fortunate in India we do have parity of pay, but I think that must be the only place there is parity of pay. Because seriously, whether it is in terms of even things like sex work, women earn much less than men do. Across agriculture, in many industries, maybe I don't know about banking, but banking is mostly public sector driven in this country. Across the board almost, women make up, I think, about 80% of the unskilled labor in this country and perhaps throughout the world. And like everywhere else in the world, we own hardly about 1.02% of property and earn only about 10% of income, probably less in India. Most of our work is not even calculated as being part of the GDP. GDP doesn't go down. The calculation just doesn't take into account that women's contribution is so much more than what we think it is today. So generally we think that we are unproductive, weak people. We're not. Women are as intelligent, often more resourceful, because we come up with solutions with far smaller resources that are given to us than most men. Women are far stronger and better survivors, especially in a country where we're still being battered to death, literally. But we don't believe in ourselves for the most part. We don't stand up for ourselves. We tend to compromise too much. We don't ask enough questions. I agree 100% with her. We don't make enough noise. We are too afraid of people judging us as Haridans or Ladaku, as we say, in Hindi. Or, she's a woman, she'll just make noise. We're too afraid of what others are going to say about us to stand up even for ourselves individually, forget about collectively. This old adage that is there, that united we stand, It's extremely true. I mean, I know it's there because it's true, but we tend nowadays to take these things, these old sayings, for granted. Believe me, if we stand up for each other and we believe in ourselves, the perception of what women's work is and why women work in non-traditional fields will change. I always tell people that we are the mothers. We bring up in the first primary years of any child's life, 1, 2, 3, say till they go to school. We are the people who shape their minds. If we are able to teach our girls and our boys that equality begins in the womb. Nobody is born unequal. I don't mean in terms of economic disparities or social disparities, but I mean in terms of gender disparity. Then our children will grow up believing that. And equally importantly, fathers must also encourage their daughters. The home is where the first few years of your life is where you imbibe things which you don't even realize you imbibe. It's only after, you have actually set foot into the outside world that you realize, and which is what's happened with me, that I realized just how fortunate or unfortunate you may have been. I have come across many, many women who are very, very marginalized partners in society. They're not even partners, that's the wrong word, who are very marginalized in society, who are absolutely brilliant in certain things. I met a Muslim lady in Trichy, Tiruchirappalli in Tamil Nadu. She must be about 55 now. She used to be a bricklayer's wife. Her husband passed away and she took to bricklaying, which itself is a very non-traditional work for women. And now she has empowered herself to the extent, starting off perhaps in a self-help group, but today she supplies other women bricklayers to a host of construction, people in construction, big construction companies in fact, and she has something like about 142 or 143, if I remember correctly, women in her fold, that is as part of what is her company. She runs it informally. She's just educated up to the 2nd standard, and till the time her husband died, she always lived in Parda. Absolutely remarkable women. Today she does her own accounts. In fact, she was able to give us a small lecture on how to avoid tax in certain places without it being illegal. So you have the brightest of women in the most unusual places. If only they were given a better education and a better opportunity, I'm 100% sure that like everywhere else in the world, we can make our mark in any field that we set out to make it in. I think I've gone quite far away from the women in leadership in education, but I think all of what I've said applies to that too. There are very few women in leadership positions in education in India, that I know. And the reasons for it are the same: lack of mentorship, lack of access, women themselves drawing back. One reason that was given to me, which I felt very bad about, was when certain women told me that, we are afraid that if we are mentored by certain people, especially men, there will be favors of a sexual nature which may be asked of us. Now, I don't know. Again, I was one of the lucky ones who probably didn't ever come across this in my life, but I've heard about it from various sectors of work. And I was very astonished to hear that something like this could exist even in the field of education. And there's one more point that I'd like to make before I end my talk here, that is the question of mobility of women. Because we are not taught that we can survive out of the family system, so to speak, in this country, and because of the lack of services that are offered to enable women to work, full-time work especially during the early years of their marriages, during the childbearing and child-rearing years, women's mobility is severely curtailed in this country. And that holds true for the education sector also. I think now increasingly a lot of women are entering this sector, but it will be a while before they can come up to the leadership positions that many of us would aspire to or would like to see them in. But again, perceptions must change within ourselves, and if it changes with us, if each of us believe that we can be leaders, then we can. Indira Gandhi never doubted it. Any of the other women leaders in this world, whom you may have read of in history. There was a Muslim empress in India, I don't think people even remember her. And this was well before the Mughal regime came into India. Parvez Sultana. Very few people remember that name. History doesn't give her much importance, but this was some 800 years ago. So if a woman could be Empress of India in those years, far before, I mean, long before Indira Gandhi was ever born, why can't we do it today? And why can't we also do it in the field of education? Thank you.
Thank you both, Lalita and Jude. If we remember, Jude starts off really by giving us issues around the way that women seem to have been airbrushed from the narrative of history, and how attitudinal issues, whether it's the role models of teachers, whether it's our refusal to accept women as equal, have actually acted as a barrier. From the time of Hypatia in the Agora, women seem to have vanished from the pages of history. And then Lalita also then talked about the fact that there were challenges around equality, and these were institutional challenges, not merely attitudinal as well. And those challenges are women as leaders, women as equals, and even sometimes women against women, and where was the mentorship taking place? So I'm going to open up with the first question before passing it to the audience. And my first question both to Jude and Lalita is, if there are all these challenges, are quotas a solution to solving the issues of women and equality and access at an institutional level? So are you a supporter of quotas, Jude?
I am a supporter of quotas, yes.
You're on.
Recently, I've come to understand that if you wait for women to be given opportunities based on the human activity of saying, I like that person, I'll back them, I think they'll do the job well, you're really handing the legacy on to people who already have a bias in the main. Mm-hmm. So I'm not at all worried about the idea that if you give women quotas, some mediocre women will end up in positions of power, because there are many mediocre men in positions of power. What I do think is that quotas will allow many, many more women to come through the gate and prove themselves. And actually, that's just a natural change will happen. And in the countries that have introduced quotas, their whole productivity has improved. So yes, I'm for quotas.
Are you for quotas?
Absolutely. 100. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're on.
Absolutely. 150%. Whether it's in politics or in education or any other field, I think that unless women are given quotas, the deserving ones are not really going to get a chance. And yes, like anywhere else, everybody can't be a genius and can't be brilliant. There will be the mediocre ones coming through also. But then why not? If mediocre men can be tolerated, so can women.
So wait is a way to stop the self-replicating system, but also a way to increase productivity. So let's open the questions to the audience. We've got about 5 minutes, I'm afraid, that's all. If you want to ask a question, please raise your hand, say who you are, ask a question, not a statement, please. Looking to the audience, this is your moment. There's a lady just there, then a colleague just there, and a gentleman just there. So can we have your question? I'm going to put 2 questions together to see how many we can get through. Please, can you pass the microphone just there? Just hold a sec, the microphone's coming to you. And can you say who you are, please?
From the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. My question is to Jude. It's with regard to women. When we are speaking about women and leadership, is it very important that's my hypothesis, that when women actually are in all-girls school during their formative years, does that actually provide a confidence-building platform for them before they actually go into co-educational institutions? We do not have data with regard to that, but my work with women in science, in the STEM disciplines in India, basically shows this kind of trend, and I think it will be an important question for one to sort of pursue.
Okay, thank you, got that. I'm going to ask for that question as well to come, so I'm going to pause, we'll take this one as well. So just over there, please. Yep, go on, stand.
Lynn Heslop, British Council. My question is, I think it came up in both of your talks actually. How can women help other women more? You know, what should we be doing in our positions and our jobs to help other women come through?
So those two questions sort of fit nicely together. How can women help women more? And what about girls and girls' schooling and girls' education? I'm going to start with you, Lalita.
I'm not sure whether being in an all-girls school increases your confidence or not. I don't think there have been very many studies done on this. Scientifically, I don't have a reply for that. But I think if you just send girls to good schools, send your son and your daughter to, that itself is a self-confidence building measure. In India, very few girls go to schools. The percentage now is increasing, yes, but they drop out by the age of 11 or 12. If you send them to so-called good schools, where they have good sanitation facilities, etc., I think that itself is a confidence-building measure. With regard to the second question, there are two things, just 2 points that I'd like to make on that. One is that if women can mentor other women, and secondly, if we can forget how badly we were treated, if any of us were, and translate that, like an intergenerational shift, that it's okay if your boss was extremely rude to you or mean to you or unfair to you because you're a woman. You don't have to be the same way. Perhaps we could learn more positive lessons than be negative and about things like that.
Jude.
Well, the studies that have been done in the UK about all-girls schools suggest that girls do flourish more academically and in terms of personal confidence in a good all-girls school. The issue then is that when they get into mixed environments, because you're not educating the boys to also recognize that an equal world is a better world for them as well as women, then they suddenly come up against some of the most extraordinary psychological changes, and that can be damaging. So at the moment, the evidence says that girls in mixed schools help the boys flourish, whereas boys don't help girls flourish. So this is a situation, yes, we can segregate our girls and give them more confidence, which in the short term is a good thing, but my actual belief is that we should be educating boys about equality and not waiting for, we have a kind of a construct that goes, when women catch up with equality, then the men will be ready to meet them. But actually, this is about really fundamentally changing an attitude of all of us. And I have become very keen on considering what is the equivalent of feminist education for men? What's masculinist education? Because we really haven't even begun to talk about what boys are learning as in terms of girls and women. And some of the things that they're learning are bad for them. On the issue of how can women support other women, I said in a speech I gave the other day, an example of Margaret Thatcher, who said that she got where she got because she had to fight against a lot of male misogyny. But once having got where she got, she told the then Prime Minister of Oslo, of Norway, who was a woman, that she didn't have time to spend on looking after other women. She said, it's difficult to find competent women, it's up to them. So she obviously didn't feel that she had a kind of a ladder to leave behind for other women to climb up. I think that's a mistake. I think women in leadership roles should attend to creating a more equal world. That is ethical of them. And I think it isn't just about mentoring. Mentoring's terrific, but actually what women need, as is said in this book by Aquilanisa, is they need action, which means they need jobs. They don't just need advice, they need opportunity to practice. So give jobs to women, give jobs to girls, even if they're not paid, and give opportunities. And of course, if you're constantly told you're an exception to the rule, which is a woman in leadership you often are, it makes you vain if you're not careful. You think, well, I'm exceptional, that's because I'm exceptional. And you don't necessarily want a whole pile of other women making you less exceptional. So women can wrongly find themselves actually being a barrier to women because they want to be the only one on the top. So making women in leadership positions understand that that's a very short-term result, that won't help their daughters, that won't help their nieces, that won't help the rest of the human race. I think it's about educating women in the top who are proving to be barriers.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask, there's going to be a flow of hands. I've got a question there, I had a gentleman there, and I've got one other gentleman over there. I'm going to ask you to 3 questions, all right? So, and then we're going to see if we can get one combined answer to all 3. We're going for 3 for 1 now.
Hello, thank you for a very good discussion that we're having there. I was just wondering, you know, is it that we don't trust women in competent positions or leadership roles, or is it the mindset of men who sit in the decision-making bodies in India and elsewhere? I think it's all about how do we change the mindset. And I would say perhaps women need to have more self-esteem and self-belief. So how does one look at changing the mindset is something that I would like to be addressed.
Okay, so changing the mindset. There was a question just there, please. Just there, middle table, please. No, to this middle table. Wrong table. But yes, please ask your question.
Well, my question is connected to the lady's question. I'm from Jamia Millia Islamia University in Delhi. My name is Bulbul Thar James. I want to make the connection with patriarchy. Somewhere we are not touching on patriarchy at all, because that's where mindsets will change as well, because patriarchal control over women is over their wealth, over their mobility, and all these are access things that we're looking at for leadership, over their health, education, empowerment, decision-making, participation. All that is lacking because of the larger scenario in which the women are placed. So can we connect that with culture and education both somewhere along the line, and how do we change it? That's my question.
Sounds like a PhD thesis. Okay, so that's a question about culture, patriotism, and identity, and it links to the question on mindset. I'm going to hold just that one a moment. This gentleman had a question. He's in the front table, please, and we've missed him out twice.
Is Abhay Kumar. I teach at Sri Ram College of Commerce, and my question is very general and South Asia Pacific concern, and directed to Dr. Lalita Kumar. Many times Indian politicians make very anti-women and anti-social statements. Particularly, I remember Mulayam Singh Yadav talking about and justifying rape incident, and Haryana Chief Minister. And I believe these politicians are not simply politicians. They have a very huge mass base and a very good support among their caste, among their community, and in the state particularly. And a body like your body, where you represent, does not come very strongly on them. And civil society also does not protest. So I think we should do something about that. Okay. Your role become very important there.
All right, thank you. Can we just focus on the mindset question? So they're really, you know, because they all link together, really, these three questions around how do you shift a mindset? I mean, we talk about equality, access, and we talk about all these issues, but actually it's a fundamental change. So, Jude, do you want to have a go at this one to start off with? Challenging the mindset?
Well, let's just, since many of us are educationalists in the room, and many of you are, let's start with the word patriarchy. I think you're right. The world has looked at the word racism, and it's become accustomed to using the word racism. It's become accustomed to saying racism is bad, racism is wrong, racism may have, you know, all different kinds of versions of how it outs itself, but society needs to address it. We're actually beginning to have that same conversation about sexual choices, but we're frightened of the word patriarchy because it feels as if, I suppose, as if you're criticizing one half of the world, i.e. men, by saying patriarchy. Men are as stuck inside this world as women. It may feel that men have more advantages, but also it comes with it a burden of needing to always be in control, needing to up your status, needing to preserve your, you know, the respect around you. It has many, many problems for men, being inside a patriarchal world as opposed to an equal world. So I think we need to talk about patriarchy in the way that we talk about racism, and become less afraid and less a sense that to say patriarchy is a hostile gesture to men. There isn't a woman in this room who doesn't love men, I'm sure. You must all love men. Not all of them, but some men. And I think this is a kind of key thing, the difference between women fighting for equality in a patriarchal world and our love of men. And we get confused because men get upset and then we tone it down. But like racism, you have to say this is the problem. And so that is really where the mindset exists. And I said this earlier, that we are trying to do two things at the same time. We're trying to change the world and we're trying to accommodate the one we live in. And actually that's one step forward and sometimes one step back. And I think the mindset is recognizing the strength that patriarchy has as a force for preventing equality.
Thank you. Lalita.
With regard to the question about Indian politicians, unfortunately, sometimes I think this is too democratic a country. Everybody has the right to say whatever they want. And the patriarchal mindset, for want of a better word, is extremely deeply entrenched in this country. The tragedy is that it's not only men in India who think that way, many women think that way too. Perhaps that could be part of the reason why there's not enough protest and a loud enough protest against men like that. Maybe on the English TV channels, etc., you may find it, but in most homes in India, people may well think that yes, girls shouldn't wear tight jeans, girls shouldn't have mobile phones. I mean, if they're going to go out into society, then they run the risk of being raped or ogled or stalked or whatever it is. Unfortunately, as I said, it's not just men who think that way, it's also women. And I agree with Judith, we need to question this. We need to question it again and again. We need to be able to say that this is wrong. Very few people actually have the courage to say it's wrong loudly enough that, you know, and often enough that it starts being heard and understood and accepted. We tend to compromise too much on things like this, and we shouldn't. Yeah, India is a free country, but there are certain things that, well, they don't augur well for India even as a country, and one of which is this extremely biased patriarchal mindset that people have here. With regard to how we can change it, I think both men and women have to play a role in this. Sometimes I think that children, for want of a better word, from the age of say about 6 to 10 should actually be indoctrinated. I mean, you have to teach them at home, at school, that men and women are equal. You must learn to respect each other, and it's not all about, you know, competing with each other. She's right. Many women keep back women or suppress other women because they think that we are in positions of power, and, you know, if somebody else, if ABC comes up, then what happens to me? I think many men also do the same thing. But we need to be able to understand that everybody has a place in, you know, in the universe. Eventually it all works out. Some will, yes, perhaps replace you. Maybe you will replace somebody else. So this, this fear that one day that our position is not inviolate and one day we are also vulnerable and we are not indispensable, everybody, I think, must come to understand that nobody is indispensable, and what is going to happen is anyway going to happen. I mean, just by keeping one person down, maybe somebody else will come and take your place. Need not be a man or a woman. We need to be more secure in ourselves, about ourselves, and thereby be more generous towards other women. Changing the mindset is not a one-stop exercise. It's going to take many, many years, a lot of very hard work, and many ways in which one can do it. We need to convince ourselves, first of all, I think, that you know, a change in mindset is something where we can also individually participate. The assumption most of us make is that, oh, you know, it's going to be, it should be done by somebody else. I'm fine. I don't have any patriarchal mindset at all. But sometimes you'll find that in small ways, even we still carry the for what, again, should I say, embers of that patriarchal mindset, which we never know is going to, when it's going to spring up into flames, both personally and individually and in our work sites. Okay. So we need to look inwards, and we need to focus on changing mindset, our own and everybody around us. If we just talk, you know, if it's just to do with our family, our friends, our colleagues, I think that itself would be a big job. And as our teachers, the teachers have a huge role to play. I don't think it's just primary school and secondary school, but even in college, the way you treat your students, a good student, don't look at them as a male or a female. Don't look at them as boy or girl. A good student is a good student. Everybody deserves whatever their potential is. They deserve, you know, that much. So all of us need to also practice it. And then perhaps slowly mindsets will start changing. It's a democracy. As a politician, let me tell you, please don't vote for these people who talk all this, I mean, who come out with these bizarre, absolutely ridiculous and reprehensible statements like Mulayam Singh. As you pointed out, he's very popular. If you want to vote, vote for something who's a forward-thinking, progressive person, regardless of caste, creed, gender, etc.
Okay.
That's one of the ways, I think, in which eventually things will change.
Quick last word from Jude.
I just want to reassure you that we have stupid politicians in the UK as well.
It's a universal, I think,
Our
actually.
Prime Minister in Parliament, on television recently, said to a woman who raised an issue, he said, "Calm down, dear, calm down." It was outrageous. We just had a judge last week say that if a woman is drunk, then in a sense, she is gagging for it. That was on his blog. She is gagging for it. And therefore, you can't accuse the man of raping her. But I want to say the final thing is this. When the Delhi rape happened, and the upsurge of anger in the streets, when men and women together protested, this was inspiring for the UK. What happened in India had a direct trigger on the impact in the UK of women having more courage and men having more courage to speak out. When Malala was shot and recovered and spoke out, it was a trigger for feminism in the UK. So you must understand that we are connected. We are looking to you for your strength and your statements about justice, and that makes women in the UK less timid. So, you know, we need you. We need you to say that you won't stand for it. And that makes us say, right, we have our own injustices. We can't pretend they don't exist.
Thank you. Can I just go back to the theme of the conference, which is about women and leadership? And we've heard from both Jude and Lalita about aspects of women, history, the narrative. But just go back to some of the hard data, because we sort of presume that in higher education it's a much more liberal and open regime. 3% of women vice-chancellors in South Asian universities. There are 650 higher education institutions in South Asia. The absence of women from senior leadership, from research positions, professorships, is first of all a business issue. It makes no economic sense. It's an academic issue. It makes no academic sense. It's a fundamental flaw in our system, because without an equity of access, without women in terms of senior leadership roles across higher education, we fundamentally create a failing system. What we're going to be looking at after the break in 20 minutes' time is some of the research from the University of Sussex that exposes some of the issues around this flaw. Would you please say thank you to Jude and Lalita? And it's now time for tea. You can have conversations with both of our colleagues here, and we're reconvening in 20 minutes, please.